Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Deserts of Plenty. My name is Ralph, and thanks for sticking around and coming back and listening to episode 31. Um, I was just reflecting on recording. Well, this is the 31st episode, but this is the 30th one I've recorded. 'Cause I did have one repeat, the one on anti-fragility, which is one of my favorites. And yeah, just had too much that week and couldn't upload a new podcast, so had to have a rerun. But it's a good one, I think. I like it. Yeah, so I I was just thinking today about why I do this podcast, and when I started, it was I used to say like, oh, making our way in this crazy world, and I still think that's true. I'm still trying to make sense of a world that I have. My belief now is that it's too um, complicated to make sense of. Our brains, which are through years of evolution, years, hundreds, thousands of years of evolution, millions of years, um, are just not equipped to take in this world that we now live in. We I can't remember who was talking about this, but his thing was, well, if you take the entire history of time that human beings have been in existence, so modern humans, so and that's somewhere between 100 and 250,000 years. So, but if you so let's just assume, okay, 250,000 years, and then you wrote a 1,000 page book, and so each page is 250 years. Well, basically, from page one up until like page 950, not much changes, right? And it's only about 5,000 years ago, which would be what, 20 pages? 200, 5,000 divided by 250. Yeah, that's like 25 pages. Um, oh my God, why is my math so bad? 20 pages. Um, anyway, the point being, for the vast majority of those pages, nothing happens. And then only about, whether it's like 6,000 BC or 10,000 BC, we started farming, started domesticating wolves into dogs, started living probably in being less nomadic and more staying in place, leaving and spreading out from Africa into, the rest of the world. Um, but that's only just, a handful of pages ago. And then this page that we're on, page 1000, is 250 years old. So that would go back to like 1750 roughly. And almost everything that we see around us has been happened in the last 250 years. So the point being, our brains have not evolved, have not caught up to where we are now. These brains were designed for that first 950, 70, 970 pages, and now we're in a world that is so complex and so different from what our brains were evolved to do, right? Having a group of maybe 150 people, now as communities, you may have thousands of contacts, or hundreds, and it's just too many people, or just even being aware of the tragedies that befall people a half a world away. And of course, it's tragic to hear about it, but it's like, oh, shrug it off and then get back to thinking about your grocery list. Um, anyway, it's just, I still think that's what this podcast is about. For me, it's trying to make sense of the world as much as I can, letting go what I can't even hope to understand, and just being okay with everything. And that's one thing I want to talk about today. Is one of the things that I now have come to believe and or realize that brings me makes it easier for me to exist in this world. With everything that's going on, from the destruction of our environment to the threat of nuclear war, which doesn't go away, and we all just kind of like put our heads down and just kind of like, well, didn't happen today. Hope it doesn't happen tomorrow. Um, I guess one of those things. It's just one of those things that's even just too. horrible to even contemplate it happening. And we know from the historical records now that there have been many times when the nuclear war has been averted. Uh, Stanislav Petrov, I think, is the guy who in 1983, in the wake of the Korean Air disaster, was at his post and he saw five nuclear warheads heading towards the Soviet Union. And if he and he just made a decision not to pass that along, and his orders were to pass that along up the chain of command, and that could have, if he had passed it along, could have triggered a huge Soviet response that to what was actually a glitch. And his reasoning was, well, if America was going to launch a surprise attack, it wouldn't send five missiles; it would send a lot. And so he decided on his own to not pass it along. And had he, the world as we know it may have ended in 1983. But that's not even the only one the only time we came close to nuclear annihilation. Anyway, it's the kind of stuff that if you really thought about it, would probably drive you insane. So we gotta just kind of like let a lot of things just go. And as the world gets more complicated and and harder for our monkey brains to understand, ape brains, I guess I should say. Um, yeah, it's I think maybe we gotta pick and choose. Anyway, that's what this podcast is about. It's a long-winded introduction to say what is going on with me, and that's what it is. Anyway, so that brings me to today's topic, which is uh, this comes from the Buddha and wise fella. Anyway, uh, so we probably all aware of our five sense organs. Our eyes that see, our ears that hear, taste buds, touch, smell, etc. So those are the five. Uh, but the Buddha also saw our conscious brain as a sense organ, and what it sensed. So the eyes, we sense light rays, we see images, our ears hear sounds. Of course, we all know that. And he said the brain was also a sense organ, but what it sensed were the thoughts that bubbled up from our, what we would call it, our subconscious. And so why is that of practical use or interest? Is that um, he said that the thoughts that arise unbidden in our brains are no more ours than the light rays that enter our eyes when we see objects. We don't own those things. We're not responsible for them. They are e- experiences appearing in consciousness. They are not. So for me, I have a terrible fear of heights, and for a long and one of the reasons I have a fear of heights, like many people have phobias, is that when I'm in a really high place and I feel my hands get really clammy, there's a little voice inside my head that tells me to jump. I don't know where that voice comes from, but I always thought it had something to do with me, that I had a death wish, or I was in some way responsible for that. But now I see that not as a responsibility that I have, or that it's some deep side of myself that is self-destructive or whatever. It is a thought that comes unbidden. It's not mine. My consciousness perceives it. And now it's much easier for me to go, oh, that's just something that arises in consciousness. It's not directing me to do anything. It's just whatever, my subconscious, making you're thinking about the range of possibilities that could happen, and that's one of the ones it's sending forward. And my conscious brain recognizes it. Uh, but now I think of it, that wherever that thought came from, as not mine. I'm not responsible for it. It is the sense organ that is my conscious brain is just perceiving this thought that's coming unbidden out of somewhere, the same way that the light rays that bounce off objects and into my eyes so that I can perceive them are not mine. I don't own any of that stuff. I only own what my choices are and what I decide to do with the information I have. So my thoughts are not mine. I'm not responsible for them. They are not in any way, some kind of um, window into my soul. They just are there. And then it's up to me to do what I will with them. That's the conscious choice that I make. Um, but the thoughts themselves are not mine. And so I find that really kind of freeing, because, yeah, you can't control. If you've ever tried meditation, and I do now, I meditate daily, and one of those things that I highly recommend, if you've never done it, to give it a shot. It's I'm a big fan of it, and but one of the things about meditating, if you ever try to just sit quietly and just open up all your senses to the world around you, is you just within seconds you're flooded with thoughts, and you get distracted and you stop thinking about your breathing if you're focusing on your breathing, or you stop thinking about the sounds in your environment, or the pressure of your body sitting on a chair. You get lost in thought, and if you've ever tried to not think, it's just impossible. I don't think, unless you're really disciplined, I can't see anybody doing that for more than a few seconds. Uh, and every time I consciously try to do it, I'm sure it's within a minute. I'm thinking about something. Uh, Something just comes into my brain, and I think of those thoughts now as like waves that come in from the ocean, and as the wave comes out, it deposits something, and that thing in my brain is a thought, and I can choose to act on it, or I can just let it go, and it doesn't define me. It's just it's like random noise. It's popcorn kernels, and you don't know which one's gonna pop, and that whatever one pops is the thought that comes up, and it's completely random and disconnected, and it's just part of the noise. The exact way, like if you're just sitting meditating and your window's open and a car goes by outside, or it's a truck, or it's a motorcycle, or it's an ambulance. There's no more control over any of that. It just happens. Our control, such as it is deciding what to do with that. And that's one of the, for people who think, if you think free will is real, just sit down and say, okay, if free will is real, sit down and don't think about anything for 2 minutes and see how far you get. Um, if you can do it, my hat's off to you. All right. Well, that's my thing today. Uh, it, I, to me, I just find that incredibly kind of liberating. It really removes from me the sort of judgment I had of myself of thinking certain things. And like, oh, what does that say about me? What kind of person thinks about being up on a high place and jumping because just to see what would happen? I mean, of course I know what's going to happen. I'll be killed if I do that. But that was the thought that would always, these intrusive thoughts that would come into my head, which is, according to one psychologist or psychiatrist I spoke to, is that kind of realm of obsessive compulsive disorders, those intrusive thoughts about doing self-harm to yourself. And I never would do it, but it's so terrifying. And that's why I hate heights, because the minute I'm up there, and I know in my conscious brain, it would just take a second. It would just take a second of me listening to that voice for me to be dead. And that's why, for me, I find heights so terrifying, because all I have to do is lose control of my impulses for a second, and I would jump. But I mean, I know I would never do that, but it brings me to another podcast idea that I'll be talking about soon. The odds are never 0% or never 100%. So there is a chance. as small and as slight as that is, but it just takes one time, right? Anyway, that's why I'm afraid of heights. And this idea that these thoughts that are intrusive are not mine, and they have nothing to do with me, my the person that I consider myself, if self is even a real thing, which is a whole other topic and interesting side journey. What is the self? Is there a self? What does that mean? I love these rabbit holes that you can go down. And I love that, there's certain questions that hopefully will never be answered, because if you could answer every question, you'd be kind of finished. You'd be like, well, now what? Not a lot left to do. Anyway, that's my time today. Thanks very much for tuning in, and I hope some of this makes you think, resonates with you. Please feel free to write me, send me notes. I'd love to know what's going on with everybody. Thanks very much. Have a great week. Bye bye.